And what we did was basically map the super entrepreneurs, individuals who have amassed $1 million fortune at least through entrepreneurship. And what we found has a very strong free market message, because the rate of super entrepreneurs around the world varies significantly. So high impact entrepreneurs per capita is 2 times as high in countries with a British legal tradition, such as US, UK, Canada, than countries with a German legal tradition, such as Austria. More than 3 times that of countries such as my home country of Sweden, with a Nordic legal tradition, and many people will be happy, 5 times as much as countries with a French legal tradition. What makes entrepreneurship tick? Previous research hasn't really been conclusive because they haven't measured entrepreneurship correctly. But once we do the work and look at the super entrepreneurs, we find conclusively, without any doubt, low taxes stimulates entrepreneurship. Protection of private property stimulates entrepreneurship. The cultures with high levels of trust encourage entrepreneurship, and liberal regulation schemes encourage entrepreneurship. And what do we get in return? Again, very intuitively, but we can show this on a global scale, is that you get growth, prosperity through entrepreneurship, innovation, because almost all of these entrepreneurial firms are innovative firms, and charity, because super entrepreneurs are very charitable individuals. Now, when we did this work, we really could show the Europe's entrepreneurial deficit. Just one measure is that if we look at the 100 public firms that are the largest in the US, 31 of them have been founded by entrepreneurs after the Second World War. And these firms have created 4 million jobs. In Europe, the 100 largest public firms, only 7 of them are entrepreneurial and founded after the Second World War, and they have merely created 1 million new jobs. When super entrepreneurs came out, both in science publications, but mostly the CPS publication got a lot of international attention. And Richard Branson was one of the people who wrote about this. One of the few people who was slightly critical, because he liked our publication, but he said, you're not talking about innovation, public support for innovation. And absolutely right he was. Once we put public support in innovation, we could see in the model that many European countries, which are not very free markets, such as Sweden, Germany, Denmark, they compensate by spending money, public money on innovation. And once you put this in the model, you see that the free market policies play an even more important role, and of course, you should combine them with public support for innovation. Another thing that some people commented on was, because this came out when Thomas Piketty arguments came out. And this is good, you should put these arguments together, because you're talking about the super rich individuals that Piketty is attacking. And Piketty basically says, the rich earn money, they keep their money, they give it to their children, and soon enough, the old money takes over the economy, because it grows faster than the economy does. The old world devours the new world. And that the rich people are not entrepreneurs. Piketty writes this explicitly without any proof. So when we looked at it, we said, yes, Piketty is absolutely correct about France. Old money, very little entrepreneurial money, and people keep their money. But US, if you look at the US, the vast majority of the super rich are entrepreneurs. It's a higher share than in 1980. And what the rich do with their money is they take 1/3 of it and keep it in the family. 1/3 goes to government taxes, and the remainder goes to charity. So in effect, capitalism is much more fair than Thomas Piketty would say, and it is not a system where the old world devours the new world. Whereas the semi-socialist system in France actually fits this bad split model. And currently we're working on expanding this work, and one thing we're working on now is looking at modern economies and looking at the 100 largest public firms in each economy. And what we're seeing in Europe, in basically every European country, the big firms are, many of them entrepreneurial, but they are massively old. They're 100, 150 years old. We're depending on the entrepreneurship that occurred when capitalism has just reached Europe. Whereas in Israel, Canada, the US, more free market countries, many of the firms are newer ones. So I think that entrepreneurship will be more and more important issue to discuss, not least because we're seeing a wave of super entrepreneurs, innovative people with technology, environmental awareness, all of this coming from China, India, Poland. And in Europe, we have 100-year-old institutions that we're relying on. A few of them will be knocked down by this new global competition, and we will need new entrepreneurship, and we need a policy to get that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now call on Declan.
Well, I'm one of these European entrepreneurs. A few thoughts that struck me. The minister that spoke earlier on, talking about the right to buy. I was just sitting there thinking about the families that I knew in Watford, the kids I went to school with in St Michael's, that bought their council houses near Oxley Park, and what a lift that gave those families back in the 80s. It gave them a break, it changed their lives, and their kids went on from strength to strength, following the boost that they got out of that. That's just what I saw myself. Maybe there are, I'm sure there are some very difficult cases as well, but for the families that I knew, kids I went to school with in Watford, it changed their lives. It made them believe that improvement was something that was possible for them, and I found it very inspiring, even as a kid, to see that happen. The enemies of capitalism, that was a question that I was posed. The biggest enemy of free enterprise and capitalism in Europe, in this country, is not the left. It's not a man that wants to be Prime Minister who never had a mortgage, who never had a proper job outside of politics. It's not anybody like that. They're just the outcome of crony corporatism, of a system that we allow, despite all of the free market rhetoric, and we've heard some of it here this evening, that we allow to continue, where the instinct is to protect. The bailouts of these banks in 2008 was a catastrophe for the free market. The bailout of GM in America was a catastrophe for entrepreneurship. This was done by George W. Bush, a Republican. He's the guy that started this stuff. Okay, they let Lehman Brothers go. They should have let a lot of them go. You need to purge incompetency and insolvency out of the system, because otherwise the free market cannot function. And now it's left to those of us to try and explain to people that what we do not have is a failure of capitalism. We haven't even tried it. We have people posing as participants in a free market, pretending to believe in the values of the free market, who have rigged the system. They sit within our own ranks, conducting regulatory capture and undermining the system much more effectively than any leftist rhetoric can do. They are the true enemies of a free market and of capitalism. And in these national champions, I mean, I saw lots of articles praising the death spiral embrace of Nokia and Alcatel over the last week, two companies in a technological innovation death spiral, and saying that this is good for Europe. It's not good for Europe. The growth creators, the job creators, the wealth creators in the technology sector in Europe are not people that we even have, most of them we haven't even heard of yet. They're not national champions. It's definitely not Nokia, and it's definitely not Alcatel. I know both of those companies. They're not going to innovate anything. Their corporate governance is fantastic. Their social responsibility is wonderful. It's all of the boxes. They're gender balanced. They're balanced for everything. But they're not innovating. They're not dynamic. They're not entrepreneurial. They don't know what entrepreneurship is because the people that they put in charge of these companies have never been entrepreneurs. They wouldn't know an entrepreneur if it came up and whacked them over the head. They're not entrepreneurial. They're super managers, and that is why these big companies decline. And why are these super managers being put into these positions? Because investors, pension funds, and the regulations overseeing those entities that are investing in them are such that they want to put these companies into the proverbial safe pair of hands. And what do we get? We get slow death in these companies. Crony corporatives seeking help from government, seeking bailouts, seeking special deals, special contracts. That's what we get. Regulatory capture. There was talk earlier on about simplifying the tax system. Flat tax is something that even somebody like me can understand. I have to employ a battery of accountants and advisors of all sorts to try and keep us out of trouble and on the straight and narrow as we innovate and invent and hire and locate development practice, operations of our business around the world. Flat tax, make it simple, that everybody knows where they stand, close all of the loopholes. That's a way to simplify the tax system and I believe to boost tax revenues. Of course it doesn't suit the rhetoric, but whether they want to actually have more revenue or keep talking of the rhetoric of confiscation, so be it. Picketing. I actually read Pickety's Capital, which should have had a K in it. I read all of it because I had to do a review for the Sunday Business Post in Ireland. I think I'm one of the probably 10 people in Ireland that actually read it from end to end. And Pickety is a complete flake. There is the only way in there, and I had to read the whole thing because it wasn't one of those pages on a skim that you would see. But there was one place where he gave the three, what he called, the word he used was inextricable components of return on capital. One of them was entrepreneurial labour, but one of them was outright theft. That's actually the words he used. He said outright theft is one of the three inextricable components of return on capital. And this guy continued to be debated and be part of the public discourse for what, 6, 7, 8 months? Europe's entrepreneurial deficit. And this is a point, I suppose, where I've never quite understood where this Conservative government comes from in terms of its lack of vision and boldness, in terms of embracing the opportunity that this market, or potential market of 500 million across Europe, offers. I'm a European federalist. I'm a European federalist because I believe it is the least worst option for Europe and for Britain. I'm an entrepreneur, and what do? You know, my friend Peter Thiel poses the question, what's the one thing that you know as an entrepreneur that the rest of the world disagrees with you on? And what I know, the hack that I see in Europe, is that Britain, with its being the best place, the best petri dish for free market ideas, for rule of law, that Britain has a chance to hack Europe and to get into the wheelhouse and to turn this thing around and to introduce the ideas and the practices of the free market for all of the European Union. To bring about the kind of growth, to do away with the regulatory capture, and to end the bailout culture. Because we are on a path to insolvency. I believe we're on a path to hyperinflation. You can't keep printing money at these ridiculously cheap rates and expecting hyperinflation to not end up being where we go with this. I believe that that is where we're going, and we cannot continue that. We have to have a mass insolvency purge in Europe. We need a pan-European bankruptcy code, and we need it fast. so that those that are insolvent and are unfit in Europe can go through that insolvency process and go through bankruptcy quickly. We need pan-European bankruptcy. We need to allow financial institutions that are unhealthy to go through the bankruptcy process. We need something much more akin to a flat tax regime, and we need to do away with the false idea that the current ideas around corporate governance are somehow going to create growth and an entrepreneurial culture in Europe, because they won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now,
I wanted today to talk about founders. They're a very special breed, and they perform a vital function in society because they initiate new enterprises which are the lifeblood of any economy, and their dreams and actions are the future, because without them we would ossify, forever relying on existing organisations, never challenging the giant incumbents. By contrast, there are many problems with existing established companies. They tend to be bureaucratic, they become institutionalised, they get riddled with office politics. Frequently, those that rise to the top in mature companies are individuals skilled in management games rather than true leadership. Typically, such CEOs are grotesquely over-rewarded, considering that their executives, whose greatest downside will be to lose their job. At the other extreme, founders and their creations can go bankrupt. How can bosses of big PLCs justify being paid 100 or 400 times the salary of the lowest paid member of the workforce? Too often they're incentivised to expand for its own sake, to justify being a pay packet rather than actually producing better returns. Older organisations mostly have large boards where consensus rules and where diplomacy is more highly valued than facts. Ruffling feathers and upsetting the status quo is seen as the worst offence. And many large corporations are essentially in the management of decline. Crony capitalism, which you heard about earlier, is the great enemy of free markets, and it's the domain of big business, like unions and socialists. They are the ones who love regulation, which keeps out the smaller payers can't afford all the red tape. On balance, big business creates no new jobs. Research demonstrates a considerable majority of new jobs in the private sector are generated by small and newer businesses, especially the so-called gazelle cohort, the magic 6% of companies, usually run by teams, who have the ambition and backing to grow, whereas large companies, typically like banks, are heavily focused on reducing costs, mainly by shedding staff. Now, we live in an era where jobs for life within traditional big companies are no more. Neither are defined benefit pension schemes in the private sector. And the advantages of working for such inflexible, faceless multinationals have faded. This generation, I think, is much more excited about working for themselves in newer, smaller companies. Last year, there were a record number of startups in the UK, over 580,000, up 10% on 2013. Almost 15% of the workforce here now are self-employed, twice the proportion of 15 years ago. Very soon, I hope the number of self-employed will pass the 5 million mark. More will work for the government, a moment of great celebration, I think. This long-term structural shift will be a moment to savour. More and more people are enjoying the freedom and independence that comes from working for oneself. New firms are disproportionately innovative, because they have to be to break into markets dominated by well-established, well-funded players. New entrants trigger the creative destruction that defines the dynamic economy. New technology, new services, better, cheaper, quicker solutions for customers. And that's how markets are renewed, competition is enhanced, and more efficient and productive firms ascend, while tired, rigid, older ones either reform or die. And this constant survival of the fittest is what characterises a healthy capitalist system. A relentless churn of original ideas and bright talent acting as a persistent threat to complacent market leaders. On my study wall, I've got a chart of the history of the Dow Jones Industrial Average since it was devised in 1896. All the time, companies on it are rising and falling. Virtually the entire list has been usurped in the last couple of decades, because very little in business is really permanent. And I think this is a positive thing. Inventions marketed by new companies have solved many of the world's problems, be they across food, energy or communications. They displace older products, and they celebrate the vigour of the new. And that's what we need if a society is to prosper. A business climate unduly dominated by aging behemoths is like a gerontocracy, overly conservative and stagnant, fearing the future rather than embracing it. I've spent my entire career starting and growing smaller and newer companies. And my involvements when I've had them in larger organisations were really anomalies. And the most exciting experiences in my career have certainly been expanding fledgling firms tenfold or more. So I believe the route to prosperity lies in limited government, free markets, a respected justice system, choice, the profit motive, competition and growth. And we should never let temporarily difficult conditions blind us to the wonderful opportunities that always await those willing to try. I think the prospects look bright and the future remains entrepreneurial. And I'll leave you with one of my favourite entrepreneur quotes. It comes from a man who was quite an adventurer, Lawrence of Arabia, and it goes like this. All men dream, but unequally. Those that dream at night in the dusty recesses of their minds awake the next day to find that their dreams were mere vanity. But those who dream during the day with their eyes wide open are dangerous men, for they act out their dreams to make them reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to take some questions now. First, I just wanted to ask the panel, if Declan is right and crony corporatism is the dominant ethos, how on earth do you change the political culture? Because it ultimately comes down to politics.
Well, as you know, I've had a foray or two into politics. I haven't figured out the answers to that yet, but I'm trying to. One of the problems that I see